Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am thrilled to have in the virtual studio today Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons. And she's special for a number of reasons. But I thought particularly what's of interest to everyone in our audience, particularly those of you who are in people and culture roles, is that Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons is a retirement transition expert, lawyer, and author of a book that was published earlier this year, Encore, a high achiever's guide to thriving in retirement. So I don't know if I fell into the high achievers category, but I think I am a lifetime worker. So I'm going to look for guidance and advice from Elizabeth Parsons. Hey, just a couple more things about Elizabeth before I let her tell you about herself. She's a magna cum laude graduate of Georgetown University Law Center, a summa cum laude graduate of James Madison University. She spent over 2 decades shaping professional development and transition strategies for legal professionals. After a successful career at Milbank, she founded Zelenka Parsons to support AmLaw 100 firms with succession planning and partner retirement. As co-founder of Encore, and I'm going to ask you to tell us more about that, she designed innovative methodologies that empower high achievers to navigate retirement with purpose and fulfillment. Through her work and expertise, Elizabeth Parsons helps individuals turn life's transitions into opportunities for growth, reconnection, and reinvention. So whether she's writing or speaking or guiding others, Elizabeth is dedicated to helping professionals thrive in the next chapter. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth. How can high achievers turn retirement into the most dynamic and fulfilling chapter of their next lives?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for the lovely introduction. Isn't that the $1,000,000 question, right? I think for most people who have been in intense careers, and I sort of use that word high achiever a little bit tongue in cheek to laugh at myself some, because as you can see from my academic achievements, I was on quite the little achievement ladder there. And many of my clients have
Why do
been,
you speak of it as a little achievement ladder? Those are big accomplishments, Elizabeth Parsons. You're well
well,
qualified to speak to our audience on this topic. I'm thrilled.
fair enough, but it can set you up to sort of perpetually
Uh-huh.
measure yourself, sort of according to these outside frameworks. And,
Uh-huh.
and I think when you land in a career, certainly a professional career where you are providing services to other people, often trading your time and freedom, for good money, but still you end up really getting good at evaluating your definition of success around external feedback loops. Like, how much money did I make? And did I get a bonus? And how many hours did I bill? Or how successful am I seen by my peers and my clients? And I think what can be challenging when people hit this inflection point where they're going to have to set all that down and say goodbye, we don't stop needing a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning and a sense of validation just because we're retiring. But it can feel really difficult to understand how to rebuild those feedback loops and how to make them really more internally sourced when you're so used to sourcing them externally, sort of in, you know, frameworks and constructs like school and career. So one of the things that I know I struggled with when I made my change from being in a big law firm to sort of really it was, the causal force was motherhood, but the truth is I
Uh-huh.
had to make myself professionally. It was rebuilding all of those things and even recognizing that I needed to. It took me longer than it should have to realize what the problems were and then begin some sort of diagnoses and then begin to figure out how to fix it. And my hope with people is to give them the tools and the knowledge and the frameworks to get out in front of the issues as they approach retirement so they can set the stage way ahead of time in a way that empowers them. So they move through this moment and it feels more like a graduation into something exciting than a retirement and into like something less than what they've had. So that's a broad answer, but I think it really does set the table well for what some of the underlying reasons are for what are very, very capable people finding themselves feeling lost when they enter this new stage.
It's so interesting to me because as a coach to founders turned CEOs and others in the C-suite, we're often connected because of a transition. It's a chance to step into a new territory in terms of executive development, or there's been some feedback, some environmental noise or concern related to behavior or performance. And eh, I learned a lot from Bill Bridges, now deceased, who wrote a lot about transitions. It's never
Mhm.
so much that we're afraid or that we're so in love with the past that we can't let go of it, or that we're so afraid of a future that we can't embrace a new order. It's the period of transition and figuring it out. And I think that's where someone with your expertise comes in so well. As I know colleagues now, a lot of the career experts used to talk about the three stages of career, the sort of, we know what happened in the third act. And now
Yeah.
people are talking about what happens in my 80s relative to this. So that's why I'm so interested in your book that's done very well in 2025, Encore, A High Achiever's Guide to Thriving in Retirement. You've challenged some of the traditional notions of retirement. Well, what motivated you to write it? I mean, beyond that story of, what you
Mhm.
help me to understand what led you from your legal career in a big law firm to becoming a retirement transition. But let's talk about the book. What's behind Encore, A High Achiever's Guide to Thriving in Retirement?
Sure, sure. Thanks for asking. Well, as many books are, it was probably a decade in the making. It knew it needed to be here before I knew it needed to be
Mhm.
here. But when I really became conscious of the fact that it was time to sit down and try to write it, it was really as a result of accumulation of conversations with people, mostly casual ones, not so much with my clients. I mean, I was very aware that when I was working with anytime I'm working with somebody, they've got very specific goals and desires in a, association with this change. But when I would talk in casual settings about what I did professionally, I was absolutely struck year over year by how many people would say something to me like, I know 5 people that need to talk to you, you know? And it struck me, this is like an epidemic. I mean, whether you're in your mid 40s, and you've just had a big exit, or you're 65 and it's a traditional retirement, or you're reinventing yourself after moving beyond your first career. What I kept hearing over and over again was this gaping hole of support for people moving into these kinds of changes that the world's kind of labeled as retirement, and not having a playbook. Like, they've got the financial playbook, but they don't seem to have a playbook for the rest of their lives. And frankly, once you've got the money piece relatively well figured out, I mean, now you're really looking at, well, what is my life going to be about? Because I don't need to trade my time for income anymore, but I've got all these skills and relationships and know-how and wisdom. I'm still energetic. I need purpose. I need to be mentally challenged. And so you're so sort of focused on what's ending that sometimes it's hard to conceive of what all of those new things could be or should be. And I think without a game plan, people are at risk of, feeling very lost, very isolated, sort of embarrassed and alone about that fact. And the next thing you know, they're 6 months into it and their friends and family are looking at them and saying, I don't think this is going very well. And we see those examples of people who don't thrive in retirement at all and don't know how to get back into gear. So to me, the book was an opportunity to share what I've learned over 15 years with a broader audience, and hopefully structure it in a way that it gave the underlying whys, why is this a challenge, as well as some true strategies and tactics to apply for yourself. I still think, whether it's help from friends and family or a professional, I mean, I think getting support is always a great idea, because this is a very, very big change and it's normal for it to be hard.
And I think, and I'm curious as to your perspective on this, Elizabeth Parson. W Is it ever too early to start planning?
Gosh, I love that question. I don't think it is because I think we get so focused on what's happening now in our lives as we must be, when we're certainly in middle adulthood, raising families and trying to build our financial security. But it's very valuable to sort of lift your head up now and then and look out across the horizon. And I tend to think of it in 10-year increments. When I'm working with somebody, no matter what age they are, I think it's very difficult to get too tangible beyond the next decade. But it's incredibly interesting to ask yourself, what would be true if this next decade were spectacular? What do I want? What when I'm standing at 60 or 70 or whatever that 10-year out age is, what will I have done? What will I have experienced? What are the challenges I will have, conquered? I mean, whatever it is for you, but just asking those questions can really energize some long-term thinking and some long-term behaviors that take you in those directions, even as you are battling the daily reactivity that we, we all experience when we're working. So I think it's never too early.
That's great. And, Elizabeth, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions dedicated professionals have about retirement? What are those misconceptions?
Well, I think what we see is that when people are still, in a sense, far away from retirement, they really do imagine that as long as they've got money and they've got financial security and the 401k makes sense and they've got the thing wired in. It's kind of like, oh, as long as I've got the money thing figured out, the rest will take care of itself. I am here to tell you that is a myth. It does not take care of itself. We must take care of it. We must design it and we must shape it. So I think there's a misconception that you don't really need to do much more than deal with your financial advisor. So that's one. Another is that a life of pure leisure is the answer. So I think when you've been working hard, and certainly as my clients have, 30 Saturdays in a row sounds like a dream, but 365 Saturdays in a row, that starts to make people anxious. And I think the truth is that leisure has meaning when it's in tension with effort, when it's in tension with something that asks more of us than pure relaxation or fun or just even lighthearted stimulation, TV and whatever. So I think that it's a misconception to imagine that literally just, leisure for the rest of your life is going to create a really rewarding, fulfilling chapter. I'm not saying, I have no judgment for anyone who wants to give that a shot, but I can tell you the people we work with who come to us a few years into that often say, this is not cutting it. I mean, it's fun. It was fun for a while and it's fun in, small batches, but I can't live like this. I can't just golf and eat out all day. That's not a life.
It is certainly interesting to see the stories and the experiences of those who retire in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, and beyond. It's just interesting to see their experience, how they shape their lives, where the directions have taken them,
Yeah.
as many successful people. And why though, why are these transitions easy for some?
Hmm.
Those who, carefully plan to do it in their 40s or 50s. Um, but why do you think retirement is particularly challenging for high achievers? Most of my mentors, whom I consider high achievers, right? Of course, I hold them in esteem.
Hmm.
They work essentially until the day they drop dead, until the day they die. Uh, yeah, I know another number of other successful people who are able to make that transition. But why are these transitions so challenging for high achievers?
Well, I think, in addition to that, that sort of conditioning that they've got
Uh-huh.
I need other people to tell me I'm doing okay.
Good
Um,
point.
I think it's also
Good
because
point.
as a person who enjoys achieving, the way I'd reframe that is, there were personality types out there, and they're often drawn to these kinds of professions they feel on purpose when they're working toward worthy goals. And the notion that they're done pushing themselves to the edge of their comfort zone or even slightly beyond it so they can keep growing and keep evolving, that is not a very energizing sort of way to live. So I'm not at all knocking anybody's recipe for life. Like if you're good and you've rung the bell in your own mind and you're ready to coast for a while or forever, have at it. I'm here for the people who say, I'm never going to be done with pressing myself into fresh spaces, fresh challenges. That's what energizes me, or I want to be contributive in the world. It's important. That's what gives my life meaning. And so I think for those kinds of people, the traditional sort of construct of retiring where it's all about, I finally get to relax and play all day, that just doesn't check the boxes for them. And even if they set goals for themselves that are very personal, like I'm going to get very fit and I'm going to learn a new language, these things, they need to feel that they're doing something consequential to somebody besides themselves. And so I think that's the theme I see is that, and I don't, necessarily recommend people go off and take on another monolithic undertaking. I mean, I look at life more as a mosaic and the opportunity to have a mix of energizing and interesting things at this stage when you finally get the freedom, to play and experiment and challenge yourself. That's sort of what we gun for. But yeah, I would say most of the people who have a vision of an engaging life in retirement aren't satisfied with the more traditional idea that, the golden years and you're just out kind of playing all day.
I joke with colleagues. I took a job on recently, a couple years ago, as a department chair, program chair at a
Yeah.
university, which I can do mostly remotely. And I think you'd make more money delivering pizza.
Exactly.
But it does afford a certain opportunity to think about, generativity and all of those things that's become so important at various
Yeah.
career stages. So what shapes your story? So I get it; those are big transitions, powerful ways that you can describe them. Do you have a personal story or an experience from your career that shaped your view on the navigation of these transitions?
Oh yes, absolutely. And mine did occur earlier in my life. So I was on a very good 10-year run at that law firm you mentioned. It's a big Wall
Hmm.
Street firm and,
Yep.
very intense and challenging. And so I'd been there 10 years, 80-hour weeks and all the rest of it. And I'd, sort of arrogantly decided, oh, I'll just become a mom too. What the heck? I mean, I'm clearly a superhero here. So by the time I had a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old, and I was still trying to juggle the huge transactions I was running and the hours that I had to keep, it struck me there was no way I was going to get an A+ in both spaces. And a little, that high achiever person didn't like that. And I mean, truly, I was wrestling with it. I really loved my job, but I loved my role as a mother too, and I didn't want to forsake that. So I did make a very, very tough decision to let the career go. Um, and I mean, I knew I was sad about it, but I also had this idea that, I'd land on my feet, so to speak. I mean, I just didn't even question the okayness of my decision or the okayness of who I'd be once I was living my decision. Because again, I was so focused on the fact that I had enough money to get me through a few years before I had to necessarily sort that out. And so I used the explanation with my whole community. I'm front ending my retirement. I'm borrowing some time for my retirement so I can be with my kids, get them raised up a little bit, then I'll figure out what new professional Elizabeth is all about. Well, it was not quite that simple. And so once the euphoria wore off and all the getting resettled and we'd moved cities and all the rest, once all that was behind me, I was lost. I mean, I was absolutely lost. And it was embarrassing. I mean, I could not explain it. I couldn't explain why. And it wasn't that I wasn't happy, being in a mother role, but it wasn't enough. There were huge parts of my identity that had no home. I didn't have a place for all of the skills that I developed. I was used to living like at Mach 10, and suddenly I had an abundance of time and I had no idea what to do with that but try to kill it. It was just like, oh, what do I do with all this free time? Um, so I didn't know who I was in that new world. And I didn't know how my life should work in that new world. And it took me several years before I was back to a sense of confidence and sort of in a state of agency where I felt like I had a game plan for the way to live. And, I just, so that was very shocking to me. And what I later decided was, wow, I just had so many blind spots. And all the work I had to do to understand them is what ultimately did lead to the work I do now. I mean, I literally sat down and codified some of that work and thought, how can I accelerate this level of clarity for someone else? So they don't have to wander around in the proverbial desert for 3 years, and maybe never figure it out. Because I thought at 35, I had a better shot at figuring it out than maybe I would have at 65, if that same thing had happened.
Well, awareness and agency are powerful pathways to helping others and to coaching others. And as I think about those concepts, I also think about, we often approach things from our own
Yeah.
domain or our own expertise perspective. The last contractor wasn't as good as the next contractor, all that
Yeah.
same stuff that happens. So I think about your background as a lawyer. I mean, working for one of these big firms, how that influences your retirement planning. Just as a financial advisor has a role. I mean, there are people who
Mhm.
worry about your health. There's the concierge medical services. There's all kinds of stuff that's out there. So what is it about your background that shapes your offer and your approach, Elizabeth?
That's a great question, and one I haven't received before, I think. I think what part of what I bring to the table with that is, first of all, I do really truly understand the mindset of people who've had, um, whose jobs have required them to react to a never-ending flow of material. Most jobs probably are that way, but I think as a lawyer, like, we are very reactive. We wait for everyone else to tell us what the problems are on our
Mm.
plate at any given time, and our job is to solve those things. And so most of my experience up until I left that world had been to react to
Mhm,
assignments, right?
mhm, mhm.
I didn't have to go find any of that. And so I think one of the problems I had to solve for myself was, how do I become the author or creator of my life? How do I do that? And how do I even if I had the tools to do that, how do I know what it is I want? I haven't asked that question. That's not a place lawyers hang out. What do I want? They just say yes to whatever's coming. And so I think when I now work with people, that is a very, very prominent part of the work, is how do we make you the creator in your life? And are you comfortable with that? Do you know how to do that yet? Or is that a foreign concept? And so I think, in a sense, that's a lot of how my program is structured. It's giving people the tools to get their hands in the clay of their own lives and say, I'm going to assume no one's going to give me any more projects. I'm the one, deciding now what it is that I do every day, who I show up for, where I put my energy. So I think that is one big influencer, in terms of the way I structured my programming and my material. And I do tend to work heavily with people from professional organizations like that who thematically relate, very much to what I just said.
Oh, sure. And, having spent a good part of the best parts of my career in strategy and human resources leadership, um, the day after an executive leaves an organization, in most circumstances, there are some other pathologies sometimes present, but in most circumstances, people don't know who she or they were the next day.
That's
Um,
right. Yes.
so that's why I love to, discuss with you about um, why you talk about replacing quantitative success measures with qualitative fulfillment. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think it goes, very much back to this sense that a lot of the time we are calibrating our sense of, accomplishment and achievement and okayness by these quantitative measures than they are. I mean, in my world, for example, they were things like the billable hour, like how many hours did you bill and how big was your bonus and, how much work were you responsible for bringing into this firm? But it's literally like a spreadsheet of metrics, and these things are very important to the organization that you work for, and they are how that organization understands its success. And therefore, as the people making those things happen, you are also, in a sense, sort of swimming in metrics, and they're metrics that all go away when you retire. And so you've really got to ask yourself ahead of that moment, ideally, what what am I going to use to assess my own satisfaction with the direction my life is going? And it's not probably going to be so many quantitative things anymore. It's qualitative. It's going to be more subjective and hopefully more internally sourced, sort of, am I satisfied with the kinds of goals I'm working on? And are my relationships in a great place and getting better? And I like to talk about the relationship portfolio because we all talk about the money portfolio, but how's the relationship portfolio? Is it abundant and diverse and rich? And have you reactivated old friendships? Are you, investing in relationships that might have withered a little bit when you were working? Are you testing yourself in new areas? To your point about brain growth, I mean, are you taking on new and interesting and stimulating challenges? So I think whoever sets those criteria, I mean, they're different for different people. But I think to know what they are and have a way to systematically check in with them is important for those of us who are used to having measures and being measured.
Well, let's
So I
explore
think,
this a little more, and
yeah,
it'll be a way of leading to my last question. So let's consider this the next to the last question. Is that
sure.
I mean, talking about these personal relationships and community. Uh, what are how do personal relationships and communities play into thriving during retirement, and how can professionals who approach their careers with dedication nurture these aspects of relationship and community? What I notice among some colleagues who are retired is that those who seem to do well understand that uh, you have to get out. No one is going to come knocking at your door if
Yes.
you suspect it. Following a very busy career, as an orthopedic surgeon, as a obstetrician, as a powerful attorney in a big firm, uh, it's a really different place when you're not flying back and forth to Washington or wherever you practice your domain of expertise. Um, so talk about that, Elizabeth. Talk about this personal relationships and communities and the roles they play.
Oh, absolutely. We tell everybody, first of all, that is really the richest vein you can mine as you think about moving into a thriving retirement, is really, really looking at the relationships that, first of all, are active now and that you care about and how you want to invest in them
Mm,
even more. But the great, great opportunity for most people is to reactivate dormant relationships. And
mm,
this is the narrative we often hear. So I will make that recommendation just broadly in a discussion, and I will immediately hear, yeah, but I've been a terrible friend. I
mm.
mean, I've been busy and I haven't reached out. I mean, these people probably think I'm just a jerk because I've just not been around. And I remind them, but they've been doing all the same things you've been doing, right? They've been raising their families, working like crazy, trying to create that security in their lives, taking care of and being productive for all these responsibilities. They're just as sheepish as you are. So be the one who reaches out. And I say to them, put yourself in the position of somebody receiving that overture from an old friend who says,
Mhm.
hey man, I know I've been absent for 20 years, but are you around? I'm coming into town. Do you want to
Mhm,
grab lunch? How would you feel? And of course, and instantly when they put themselves in that position, they're like, I'd love that. And so it's like, okay,
mhm.
well, just be the one who reaches out then. And then I try to give them some frameworks. It depends on people's personalities, but one great one is literally inventory all of these friends and don't have any judgment yet about who you want to reach out to and who you don't and how you will, but just brain dump it. Who are all the people from college and high school and maybe a professional school and other places you've worked, people you raised your kids with. And who are these folks? And figure out where they are, and are they folks you can reach out to still, and start doing that systematically. When people do that, we get absolutely the strongest feedback is just that is the best thing I've ever done. It is so much fun getting to know everyone again. And they're all like popping up going, oh, wow, we made it. We're back. We're alive. Here we are. So it's a very energizing exercise. And then what often comes out of that, of course, is new opportunities, to get involved in things or reactivate interests or travel. I mean, those relationships are pathways. And it's an absolutely just very rich starting point.
Well, that's great. And on the topic of staying connected, I mean, that really leads us to my last questions, which are how do people get connected and stay connected with Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons and the work that you're doing? And, um, as you describe that to people, we'll have it in our show notes as well as some other links that you've provided to us. Um, but also, I'd like you to, now that we've had some exposure to your book that came out earlier this year, Encore, A High
Mhm.
Achiever's Guide to Thriving in Retirement. What's one of the key takeaways that you want our listeners to remember? What would it be? So, how do we get in touch? What's the key takeaway that you want listeners today to take from your great book in 2025, Encore?
Wow, thank you for asking. I would say, in terms of takeaways, the biggest thing that I would remind everybody about is that you are not alone. If this feels like an unsettling or even scary change, if everyone around you is wondering why you aren't celebrating all aspects of this and you're sheepish about, feeling unsettled, you are just not alone. And I think so many people think they are. They think they're the only ones who don't have this thing figured out. So my advice always is find other people who have gone through it, who are going through it, be a support to them, and then let them be that to you. If you need a professional resource, go get it. But don't fear that everybody else has figured this out and you haven't. That's simply not true. And on that note, if any resources that I've put out in the world are of use, you could probably find them all at LinkedIn. My name, Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons. I think I'm the only one on there. And my book is, available everywhere books are sold, but you can certainly find access to it there. My professional businesses are there, and other media that I've been involved in. So this is my passion, helping people through this change. And I see them go do amazing things. So yeah, I would just say you're not alone and go for it.
Oh, that's great. It's a great way of thinking about it. These new rules of retirement, how to thrive, not just survive, and how we rethink retirement. It's been great to be in conversation with Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons, and please be sure to visit her on LinkedIn and other places where you might find her. So until the next episode of the People Dividend, I want to say thank you, Elizabeth Zelenka Parsons, and
Thank you so much.
stay well until the next time we meet on the People Dividend Podcast.